Hello, and welcome. I think this is the hottest ticket so far of Groundswell, not just because the sun's shining. Isn't it just glorious? I have to confess, I have all of my clothes in my car to work with any particular eventuality. It's lovely to be out in a dress in the sunshine, and it is so lovely to be out in person, able to see people in full 3D, in real life. So many people that I've been chatting to on Zoom and on the Twitter sphere over the last 15 months, and to get together in this brilliant gathering, this brilliant event, which Groundswell have knocked it out of the park yet again. So well done and thank you. I'm Sue Pritchard, and I'm the Chief Exec of the Food Farming and Countryside Commission, and I really do think I've got the hot ticket for the next couple of days, because we've got 4 fabulous people to talk about something that is pretty much at the forefront of all of our minds right now. How do we collectively navigate from the Common Agricultural Policy and all of that context into a whole new payment system, and perhaps really importantly, a payment system that enables us all to farm in a way, produce food in a way, look after the environment in a way that acts on the really critical challenges of our time, the climate and nature crisis and the public health and well-being crisis, as well as now the economic recovery in the post-corona world. So I can't think of anything more important to be talking about right now. I am absolutely thrilled and delighted to have people who have been thinking about this, talking about this, experimenting with this, who are in the thick of these conversations right now. We've got Jannet Hughes, Director of Farming at DEFRA, Clive Bailye, a farmer, Juliet Aglionby, who has multiple hats, but with Foundation for Common Land is today's hat. And Stuart, oh my God, my mind's just gone blank.
This is really embarrassing.
Stuart,
for you,
oh God, you know, I've forgotten my husband's name in the past.
And
I'm doing it.
Put my lanyard on.
Oh, Stuart, help me.
Roberts.
Thank you, oh God. I have to say, this has happened to me. This is my absolute nightmare. I tried to introduce, I have to say he's my ex-husband now. Maybe that's a clue. Forgot my husband's name at a party. Stuart Roberts, Deputy President of the NFU, brilliant member of our FFCC Farming Leadership Group, and great pal, and he's never going to forgive me, so that's that done. Anyway. We're going to start with some quick presentations, some scene setting, some context, because the folk that we have with us are, as I said, in the thick of this, learning, experimenting, working on the issues, so that what we have at the end of this process is fit for purpose. So we're going to start with some context from Jannet, and then we're going to start with some other reflections from Clive, Julia, and Stuart. And then we're going to get into some questions. And we'll throw the floor open. We've got some fantastic cube microphones around, so you'll see those lovely green squares bobbing about. Throw the floor open and let you ask the sorts of questions that you have. So without further ado, let's get going. Jannet, do you want to kick off?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I'm Jannet Hughes, and I have the enormous privilege and pleasure of being the Programme Director for the Future Farming and Countryside Programme in DEFRA, the best job in government and possibly the best job in the entire country. And I'm going to tell you a little bit just about what my job is and what me and my colleagues are doing and what that might mean for you. But I'm not going to speak for too long because I want to allow plenty of time for questions. First, can I just say thank you so much for having me here, and what an absolutely amazing event this is. I've never been to Groundswell before, and I'm really, really enjoying nerding out over soil along with many of you too. So thank you for having me. What we're going to be doing in our programme in DEFRA over the next 7 years is moving away from everything to do with the Common Agricultural Policy, and instead introducing a new domestic set of policies and support for farming in the countryside in England. And what that involves is, as I'm sure you know, phasing out direct payments in a phased way over the next 7 years, starting at the end of this year, and instead spending that money, which is £1.8 billion a year, spending that money rewarding farmers for producing public goods on their land, which many of you are already doing. And the public goods we're talking about are things like wildlife, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, water quality, air quality, beauty and heritage. And we want to reward those who are already producing those public goods on their land, and also get many more farmers thinking about nature and food production hand in hand. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to phase out the direct payments and we're going to spend the money instead through existing schemes to start with, so countryside stewardship and environmental stewardship, where we're improving those schemes, simplifying them, making them work better for farmers, we hope, but you can tell me if you think that's not right yet. We know we've still got work to do. And then we'll be introducing new environmental land management schemes, and there'll be 3 of those. There'll be the Sustainable Farming Incentive, and that will be to reward individual farms and farmers for producing public goods on their particular land. And that will be universal actions that anyone can take to look after their soil, look after their hedgerows, reduce their pesticide and fertilizer use, and other such measures. Then there'll be the Local Nature Recovery Scheme, and that will be for local set priorities. So that's all about making sure we pay for the right things in the right place. So we don't want to plant trees in a peat bog. We want to make sure we're doing the right things in the right place for nature and the environment and animal welfare. And then the third scheme will be the Landscape Recovery Scheme, and that's for landscape scale, either land use change or habitat restoration. So things like woodland creation, rewilding, peatland restoration, habitat creation, those sorts of things. So those 3 schemes will be gradually introduced. We're not going to do it in a big bang because we have learned from the past where we've done that and failed. We're going to gradually introduce them over the next few years, and they'll be all fully available from 2024. And in the meantime, the existing schemes will carry on being available. So there's plenty of opportunity to get involved. Alongside that set of schemes, we're also looking at how we regulate and enforce the rules in the countryside to prevent damage and to make sure that everybody is protecting the environment to meet regulatory requirements, and it's not a viable business model to just pollute with abandon. And so we're looking at regulation and enforcement to make it fairer and more proportionate and more effective in those cases where we do need to have enforcement. And we're also looking at prosperity and productivity in the sector, because what we want to try and achieve here is a prosperous, vibrant, resilient agriculture sector, producing healthy food and also producing for the environment at the same time. And like many of you here, I suspect, we think that you can't have one without the other over the long term, because you must look after the environment in order to be able to keep producing food. And you can't do the good things for the environment unless you're also making your profit from producing food. So we're doing lots of things to support prosperity and productivity in the sector, including some grants for technology and kit, including some of the stuff you're looking at here today, and also supporting innovation, research and development, and helping people to adopt more innovative methods, such as the ones that we're talking about a lot here. So we're going to be running the existing schemes and improving them, introducing some new schemes, looking at regulation and enforcement and improving that, and also supporting productivity in the sector. And by doing all those things together, what we hope to achieve is a more prosperous, resilient sector, and also better climate, environment, and animal welfare outcomes from the sector. And we really want to do this in a way that actually works for farmers, because if we don't, then we can't have any of those outcomes I just mentioned. And so I and my colleagues work very hard to try to co-design what we're doing with people who are experts, like you, in farming, who can tell us, is this really going to work on our farm or not? And if not, what do we need to do about it? Now, we don't always get this right, because it's hard, because not everyone agrees, not everyone has the same view, and this is not how we normally work in the civil service or in government either. So we're all learning together, and if we do it wrong, we want to know, and we want to correct our course and make it better. So I and my colleagues are here today. If you've got something to tell us about that, or you've got questions, you're more than welcome to come and see anyone in this fetching DEFRA green t-shirt, which I'm sure you'll agree is the most fetching outfit at the event. And we've got a lovely tent out there with several of us in these fetching outfits. And ask any of us. We've all got a lanyard that says, I'm from DEFRA, ask me a question. And we mean it. We really want to know what you think, because the only way we're going to succeed is if we all work on this as one ginormous team together. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today, really looking forward to the questions and debate. I always welcome questions. I'm very active on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, then hit me up. If you've got a question afterwards, I do always answer questions on Twitter. I'm Jannet Hughes. You can find me there. And also you can get in touch with our team over there and follow our blog, where we share what we're doing in the open, defrafarming.blog.gov.uk. You can find the details over in the tent over there. Thanks again for having me, and I'll really look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Jannet. Thank you. So we're going to come back to Jannet with lots and lots of questions. The one that's uppermost in my mind right now is, what are you learning from the co-design process? But we'll hold that for the moment, because I think there are lots of people who are also learning a lot from their participation in the process. Clive, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So just to give a bit of context, really. By the way, it's nice this in the Zoom meeting because this would be a very busy screen, I guess, for this many people here. For some context, my name's Clive Bailye. I'm a farmer from Lichfield, which is in Staffordshire. We farm combinable crops at scale and have been down the regen ag route, no-till, conservation agriculture, call it whatever definition you want to put it by, since 2008, the whole farm, but going back to kind of 2005 in their origins. Elms, for me, has been a breath of fresh air. I've never been a fan of the direct payments. I think it's made this industry lazy into some respects and kind of not really putting the environment first and soil first, which is our shop floor. What I've learned in the last 10 or 15 years is a healthy soil, healthy environment leads to healthy plants, healthy yields, and ultimately healthier profits. So what makes sense for the environment also actually makes sense for our bottom lines. And it's great for me to see how Elms is developing so far to encourage more people on that same kind of journey, which I think has to be the right route for us. So I've got some questions that I'll put to Jannet later for some of the areas that I'm not sure on. We're going to be an Elms pilot farm from this autumn onwards, I think, and looking at some of the options available. I'm quite excited to see that actually we finally might get some rewards for some of the things that we've been doing for nothing in the past, and maybe there's areas we can improve upon and do even more and take things to that next level. Secondly, for a bit more context, I was also founder of the Farming Forum and Diet Driller magazine, both of which it's been great to see DEFRA's attitude towards co-design within this whole Elms kind of process and SFI process. And I know that Jannet and David Kennedy have both done questions and answer sessions directly with members of those forums, which I know they are very grateful for, and they've really appreciated that kind of that direct dialogue with the people that are creating these new rules, regulations, and schemes. So I'd just like to thank Jannet for that, really, and that kind of open approach has been very welcome. So I'll come back with some questions later on, but don't take any more time because it's all about the questions, really, isn't it?
Thank you, Clive. Yes, and Clive has told me he's got an extensive list of questions, so we're going to come back first to Clive in the questions session. Julia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sue, and it's a huge pleasure to be here today. I've headed down from Cumbria overnight, and there are a few of us from the north, and I think it's probably more and more people coming from the north down to the south for this event each year, so huge privilege, and thanks to the Cherry family for organising and their whole team organising today. I work a lot with Sue and on the Food Farming Countryside Commission as well, and chair their Cumbria inquiry, and are completely committed to this journey towards agroecological farming, and I call it sort of farming with nature. I'm here really bringing a perspective of the 45,400 livestock farmers. They farm in about 30% of England, according to DEFRA's stats. I also chair a network called the Uplands Alliance. And we are all on a journey, and the word journey has been mentioned, but we also need to think about the destination, and are DEFRA's policies and schemes going to help us get to that destination? And do actually DEFRA have a destination in mind? Question. But leaving that there, in terms of, for me, it's about values. Like Clive, I'm not a great fan of the basic payment, and we're pleased to see the back of it. But at the moment, a lot of livestock farmers, certainly in the north, feel that they've been set off down the Grand Canyon without a paddle and without a guide. And having done that twice in my life, I was very pleased to have a guide and a paddle. So it's a question of, and I know that's not the intention, so perception is important. And it's really exciting to see the SFI coming to life, and lots of engagement there. I suppose what I've done is sort of three tests. How are we going to make this work? And it's to get the take-up, because farmers, every person here who farms, and we run a organic pasture-fed farm at home. It's a CIO. But I'm farming at the weekends, and we all have choices. And I think this is something that perhaps some of the more pure environmental organisations don't realise, that there are a lot of farmers, certainly if you go to Penrith Auction, who were standing around the ring delighted about the performance of their creep-fed lambs and are very much moving in that direction. So delivery of public goods has to be an attractive option. So that's the first of my tests with SFI. We need to get the take-up in order to see the change that many of us here would like to see. So will SFI be financially attractive and offer a fair reward? So it's not just about income foregone plus costs. It's a matter of will there be a profit element that gets people to a new place. As I said to the NAO recently, I said, well, we're all on a journey, and we got on the train. Some people haven't bought the tickets. DEFRA's 3 stops down the line. Other people are 5 stops down the line. And the NAO said to me, a lot of the farmers we've spoken to don't know the train's been invented. So so we've got a lot of work to do. So first test, is SFI, is it financially attractive? Will it offer a fair reward? And I'm like Clive, I'm also going into the pilot at home. Will it be practical, i.e. will it integrate well with my system of farming? And most people who farm to produce food. And so will the delivery of public goods work with the delivery of goods that are sold at the till? And will it be practical in terms of working with complex property rights? As Sue said, I run the Foundation for Common Land. Those 3,900 commoners have a very different set of options, as do the tenants. And a lot of commoners are tenants as well. Particularly in the north, we have sort of 50% of the land in, over 50% in tenanted sector. Your choices are different if you're a tenant. And thirdly, so that's the first test, is it financially attractive? Second test, is it practical? Will it integrate with an organic system, a pasture-fed system, a conventional system? And thirdly, is it administratively bearable? And I don't know how many of you, I'm in like GS4 and GS2 and various stewardship options, the amount of stress I spend over my spreadsheets, where all the sheep and cattle moving to every field. Is it administratively bearable? Is it accessible? And is the management of it going to be proportionate, both for the farmer, is it worth the effort, and also for society, is the management in terms of value for money, because that's something we need to provide. So on those 3 tests, I would say I think so far we're doing better on the third in terms of SFI, in terms of administration. The jury remains out on whether it's financially attractive or practical, and I'd love to hear your views.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks, that was great. Stuart.
That's Stuart Roberts, by the way. So just in case you forget next time,
never.
Look, it's a pleasure to be here. I feel slightly embarrassed, to be honest. I worked it out this morning, 10.5 miles from here. Due southeast of here, and this is the first time I've ever been to this event, so I do feel slightly embarrassed. I am also very, very grateful that I took the advice of someone very close to me yesterday, which was, for Christ's sake, Stuart, whatever happens tomorrow, don't wear your suit and tie. It is a pleasure to be here, and for one reason more than any, actually, and I've been here for an hour or so. This is one of the most positive audiences and attendances I've spoken to. Everyone is looking for solutions, is looking for answers, is looking for a path, is looking, if you like, Julia, using your phrase, for that destination. Because actually, if we don't have that destination within our own businesses, if we don't know where we want to go, then what we do is we will then flip from one thing to another without direction and without that laser-like precision. We don't know where to take our businesses. And much of what I was going to say has already been said, actually, by Clive and by Julia, but I just want to build on some of it. And Clive, you touched about healthy soils and healthy businesses, and I think there was one healthy thing you missed, actually, if we could add it to your list. And that is something we often forget about the importance of farming, the importance of a food industry, is the role we play in the health of humans. So actually, we too often, I think, forget that at the heart of farming, we are, if you like, the foundation stone, I believe, of the health service. We are the ones who keep people healthy, and we sometimes need to think about that. And I also wanted to just remind people a little bit, and I think sometimes we forget this. We talk about public money for public goods as this is some completely new thing, okay? And the phrase is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. Certainly it was never used when I was in DEFRA all those years ago, and we didn't have fancy green polo shirts in those days. But I'm not sure if that says more about DEFRA or more about my age, but never mind. But one of the things, as a farmer, and I fundamentally believe farmers up and down the country, we have always delivered public goods. So actually, the fact that the British landscape looks like it does is a public good delivered by farmers for generations. And I think sometimes we've forgotten about that. But what I also think is, where I get excited is finally those things we've delivered that have actually been intangible up till now, they've been delivered, if you like, as a byproduct of the food industry, all of a sudden may have a tangibility attached to them. And I think that could well be a very good thing. But we do need to make sure that we get the rates right. And this will be no surprise, Jannet, we've spoken lots about this over the years. Because ultimately, what will drive me, and Clive touched on this, is a profitable business. Ultimately, we shouldn't apologize for that. And we've got to make sure we get those values right. But I also think we've got to start to unpick some of the complexities in this, because actually a lot of those public goods we deliver will have multiple benefits. So, Jannet, you may well be incentivizing me to put a buffer in place because I want to keep a watercourse clean, okay? That's a public outcome that has a value. But in doing that, I may well also be delivering a biodiversity positive. And we've either got to unpick the point that I get the value of both of those outcomes, or you've got to allow me to then go and trade that other outcome somewhere else. And I certainly see a world going forward where this is not a one-dimensional transaction between the public purse and me, the farmer. I will also have the ability to trade with other things. And I think ultimately there will be that matrix, if you like, of private sector investment, public sector investment, and my own business. So look, I'm really excited. I think this is it's a fantastic event, and I want to listen. I think too often there was a great phrase somebody taught me once before, which was that we have two ears and one mouth, and too many of us use them in the wrong proportion. I would certainly be one of those. But and when we came out 2 years ago with our net zero aspiration, we absolutely put a marker in the sand that the future of the farming industry is not just about delivering food. It is about delivering food, but it's also about doing everything in balance. So it is about the environment. It is about those other things we deliver. And it was really reminded to me over the last year. And we've had a pretty horrific period the last year. It has been, I think I've seen Sue probably on at least a dozen occasions, and my surname's usually written after me in bottom left-hand corner, Sue. I'll put it in capitals next time. And the problem is we now don't have a mute button at these things, so Sue's thinking, I wish he'd shut up by now. But I wanted to touch on what was brought home to me in terms of public goods was on my farm. So I've been on this journey for a while. I'm an organic farmer. I've brought livestock back onto the farm. I probably am a regenerative farmer, okay? I'm not a paid-up member of the religion, but I am on that journey. And what brought to me the biggest public good I deliver on my patch of earth in Hertfordshire was when on Easter Sunday I had 4,000 people walk through my farm. 4,000 people who have not been able to get out and do other things, and every single one of them came through my farm. And with the exception of 2, they all acted really responsibly. They were interested in what I was doing. They wanted to know what I was up to, what was happening in that field, what was growing there, what would be the end product, where can I get it from, how have I created that woodland. And ultimately, as farmers, we've got to be way better at articulating how we're delivering that public good. It's not just a transaction. Because as we go forward in pretty challenging times, we have got to justify what that money is buying. Because we've got to compete with the health service, with the police force, with education, and with all those other things, as well as paying back the money that we've all spent over the last year. So I get really excited about this new world, but it's got to be deliverable. The values have got to be right, and you've got to allow me to also be able to go and trade other things off the back of it. So they're my big challenges, I suppose. But let's see where the discussion goes. And as I say, it's fantastic to be here, Sue Smith.
Brilliant. Yes. I'm never going to live this down, am I? Thank you. Thank you all of the speakers. So much in those introductory remarks that demonstrate that whilst we're talking right now about public money for public goods in the farming context and the sustainable farm incentive, the new schemes being developed out of DEFRA, you can't talk about that in isolation from a whole range of other really critical public benefits, things that provide public value and actually that the public values. And I think if there's a silver lining through the last 15 months, we've all had a chance to think really hard about what's really, really important to us. So we're going to try and confine our questions to the things for which Janet's got some responsibility and some opportunity to influence. But inevitably, the interconnections and the interdependencies are going to show up, and we'll provide food for thought for other sessions and other occasions. So I'm going to start off coming back to Clive, because I made him sit on his questions. And so he gets first dibs at asking some questions of Jannet, which I know she's offering to answer, and then we'll come out to the floor. Clive.
Okay. So I apologise for the length of this question in advance, but it's about carbon, and carbon is always a long, complicated subject. So although several of the standards within SFI, Jannet, aim to reward actions that sequester carbon, it's notable that DEFRA have avoided going as far as to directly quantify and pay for this public good on a simple tonnage basis. Why is that? Is it the complexity of measurement, or is it something that's been decided best left for commercial markets to develop? Potentially, if our Chancellor announces carbon taxes, for instance, in the future, is that the reason? And with that in mind, and you've stated the desire that SFI will never double fund, will a farmer be allowed to sell ISO-certified carbon via commercial schemes while still meeting standards that reward carbon negative farming?
Great question. So we would like eventually to be able to pay for results rather than actions, because that allows more flexibility for farmers to determine how to get to the results. However, we've had some of our testing trials looking at how we might do that. In relation to carbon, the reason we're not doing it now is for several reasons. The first is the science isn't settled yet as to exactly what impact you can expect to get and what the value is and how to measure it. And there isn't a kind of settled view that we can rely upon to enable us to do that. But secondly, there's a huge variation in carbon sequestration, even within a field, but also on a farm with different soil types and different types of, if you've got a mixed farm, you might have different activities taking place on the soil and also across the country. And so it's quite hard to set a price that's fair, reflecting that variation and to reflect the kind of variability in how much carbon will be sequestered. And then finally, it's quite difficult to be fair, because a farmer can take an action on one farm or even part of his or her farm. The same action can be taken somewhere else at the same cost, and they can produce quite different outcomes, because nature is a thing, as farmers know better than anyone. And so for that reason, what we've done to determine what we'll pay for through the sustainable farming incentive is we've looked for actions to see which ones contribute to the largest impact and the largest variety of impacts. So we're particularly paying for actions that will help with carbon and also help with wildlife and also help with water quality. So the water body buffering that you mentioned earlier exactly fits into that sort of category. And we know that those actions, all the science is there to back up the fact that those actions will on average result in outcomes, and we want to pay farmers fairly for having actually taken those actions. And that it does relate to the other question that was asked in the speeches about how we're setting the payment rates. And we know that that's an issue. We've had tests and trials looking at it. We've had lots of feedback from farmers about current payment rates and also the penalties that come if you do something wrong in existing schemes, and those two things have to be considered together. And we've got both of those things under review, and we'll be sharing some details very shortly about what we'll pay for in the sustainable farming incentive from 2022 onwards, and you'll see there the outcome of the review of the payment rates that we've done so far. But we are also reviewing payment rates across all our other schemes to make sure that we're setting them at the right level to reward farmers for the public goods they're producing and the costs that they incur and the actions that they're having to take.
Brilliant. Clive, you get one more question, then I'm going to ask some people from the floor.
So with my farming forum hat on a little bit more now, education and knowledge exchange are often the biggest barriers to successful change. I'm sure most people will agree. I've already mentioned that it's been quite welcomed and refreshing to see the co-design type approach that DEFRA is taking. But something that comes up a lot on social media is a concern that that land agents and advisors will end up swallowing up an awful lot of the budget that's allocated to SFI. You know, most things I've seen, a lot of research seems to show that farmers learn best from other farmers. Events like this are an absolutely fantastic example of that, and as are the various social media systems that are very used a lot now. So the question really is, how does DEFRA plan to facilitate knowledge exchange and the education that will be necessary for success of SFI? And will it focus on some of those already successful and perhaps more innovative platforms rather than the traditional village hall type meetings and paying agents lots of money to tell us all what we already know?
I see a lot of wry smiles about the telling you what you already know. So first of all, I'd just like to say I've got nothing against land agents. Yeah, exactly. Nothing against land agents or indeed anybody else in the sector. Some of my best friends are land agents and farmers and other things, so let there be no favourites. However, we do think it's wrong that you should have to pay someone to fill in a form just because we made it so complicated. And that's not right, is it? So we should, as Julia was saying, we need to make these schemes administratively straightforward and accessible so that you can say, I know what I want to do on my farm, this is what I want to do. It's really obvious to me how much I'm going to get paid and what I have to do in order to comply with these requirements. And it's all kind of very straightforward. So we are designing our new schemes to meet that. And if you would like to get involved in helping us test our new schemes, we're always looking for people to test our new services to see, do they actually work for you? So see one of us in our aforementioned posh polo tops if you would like to sign up to take part in the research to help us get that right. But we do think there's a role for for advisors more broadly in helping farmers to think through what should they do on their particular farm, because each farm obviously is different, each field is different, and each farmer has a different view about how they want to operate. And a number of our tests and trials actually have been looking at what sort of advice might be needed to help people make the right decisions for their particular farm and decide which scheme they want to go into and which actions they want to take. And we've learned a lot there about what we need, and we actually published a blog post about that, so you can see that just the other day with a bit more detail about what we think about advice. On collaboration, our tests and trials have also been looking at that, because particularly in the local nature recovery scheme, one of the things we really want to be able to support is multiple farmers and land managers working together to achieve outcomes in a particular area. Maybe it's a catchment, maybe it's a valley in the lakes, or some particular estuary or some other local area where you want to set local priorities. And we've been looking at what's required to help farmers collaborate, and very much what you say, farmers tell us they want to learn from each other. They certainly don't need me. I'm sure none of you here would like me to tell you how to do your farm. I'm sure that's not what you need me to do. But do see me after if you would like me to. I severely doubt it, because you can learn much better from each other, as you're doing here today. So what we're looking at is how can we support that collaboration? And we think that there's a role for local conveners and facilitators there, a bit like in the facilitation fund through Countryside Stewardship. So we've been looking through the tests and trials at what can we learn from that existing setup, and how can we bring that into our new schemes so that we can help farmers to make those connections and learn from each other. And then on the private finance point, which I think you mentioned, the end state we want to get to is we want there to be the market that is developing. We can see that here, of farmers being able to sell into a commercial market for carbon sequestration and possibly even biodiversity, given the biodiversity net gain requirements. And our task in government is to not crowd that out. And that's quite tricky because it's a nascent market, so it's not like it's already there and we can shape ourselves around it. We're going to be developing at the same time. And what we have to make sure we don't do is accidentally run it over so that it dies before it's born. But instead, we do things that enable farmers to stack different agreements on their farm. So you can be in the sustainable farming incentive and also local nature recovery, and also be selling into a carbon exchange market or a biodiversity market. There is a principle that all of the people paying for things in that system will say, which is we don't want to pay for something if somebody else has. So you don't want to get paid twice for the same tree, but you ought to be able to get paid for different outcomes on the same land and different activities on the same land, and that's where we're trying to get to. And we've also got tests and trials looking at that. And if you're not familiar with our tests and trials program, there's 78 different projects which are being led by more than 3,000 farmers and other experts to look at all of these different things in detail on the ground to help us work out what do we do in these schemes and how should it work. And if you want to know more about that, then have a look at our blog. And also, we're just about to publish a 6 monthly report on what we've learned over the last 6 months in our tests and trials across a whole range of issues. So follow the blog if you'd like to learn more about that.
Thank you, thank you. Now, Stuart and Julia both have indicated that they have supplementaries. So I'm going to Yeah, no?
No, let's have
No,
time
change
for
your mind.
questions.
Julia, you wanted to just come back. While Julia's just coming back, can you start indicating to me if you have some questions so the roving mics can start to rove? So there you are, roving mic. So we've got two in the middle to start with. One right in the middle, which makes it really difficult, and one down at the front here. I see you over there. Yeah, okay, good. So Julia, you...
Thank you. And I totally agree that we don't want to pay land agents to fill in forms, but what we do want to do is to get substantial public benefits. And what we do know is that good advice delivers, gets people to make changes, because you have someone on a one-to-one basis go around your farm. And after the Second World War, this is the biggest change in agriculture since the Second World War. And the reason that change happened after the Second World War is that the man from the Min of Ag came up your Lonning, and someone in the south said to me they didn't know what a Lonning is. A Lonning is a driveway that's usually bumpy. Anyway, they came up your drive. We are in Hertfordshire, and without avenues, and they really help every farmer make that change, and that means we're delivering more and we're getting multiple benefits. So I think paying for, but it shouldn't be having to be docked off your SFI. What we would like is to have and with the Food Farm Countryside Commission working on this, how do we provide that advice and I think that's really, really important. And I know the DEFRA, the witnesses yesterday to DEFRA and over the last week said that's absolutely critical.
Right, brilliant. Let's hear from the floor. So person in the middle with the green cube. Now, the trick with the cube, I gather, is to hold it right underneath your chin, like a child holding a buttercup. Sorry.
Do I like butter?
Yeah, apparently so, yes.
Thank you very much. Really interesting to hear all the talk about stacking and bundling benefits and some positive noises around the integration between things like biodiversity net gain and ELM and other schemes. But I guess my question is more around how do we, and does ELM see itself as being a mechanism by which we will help to establish both the baselines and the ongoing monitoring evaluation, so that in 5-10 years' time of this new system, on these combined systems, we're actually going to be able to prove that we've had an impact and identify the areas where we need to change. Are there going to be strands within environmental land management that will help establish those baselines and also link into more statutory monitoring regimes that are already in place?
Stuart, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to build slightly on it. I think it's a brilliant question, and I think it gets to the heart of a big issue at the moment, because I don't know about many of you guys. I'm sure you're the same. I'm being approached consistently at the moment to sell my carbon, offset somebody else's carbon, etc., etc. But I don't have a set of transparent rules, a set of frameworks around that actually I fear in 10 years' time somebody will come along and actually, where is that carbon? Where's it gone? And I do see a role for government in setting, if you like, a framework and a rule that then the private sector can come off. And there's some really exciting areas around at the moment. I think this is one of the most exciting bits of agriculture going forward. We're one of the few parts of the economy that do actually sequester carbon. We don't just produce it. But we've got to make sure that there's clear rules, transparency around that. And if there is, then actually I'm really excited about where the commercial opportunities will lead to.
If I could just add to that, Stuart may not be aware, but this exists now, and the commercial markets are growing fast on this. 2 weeks ago, I think it's a first, I'm not sure, but we actually sold our carbon sequestration for this year from our farm to a commercial customer. And that will be, solid, tangible income this year.
What price? What price did you get?
I signed an NDA, so I can't actually mention the price. It's worth doing, and it's significant, and will more than fill the gap in reduction for BPS this year, which is important.
And look,
the principle's being extended. The ISO standards there, the contracts are in place, so it's not just a hocus pocus planting trees in Guatemala and now we're carbon neutral. It's a genuinely certified scheme, so the opportunities are there now and growing quickly.
And I think the key there, Clive, is making sure people are aware, because I think the worry is there's a whole load of still those hocus-pocus schemes out there. There is a whole load of people who dangle very shiny carrots in front of people but don't have any substance behind them. And I really worry that farmers will potentially sign up to things they don't know what they're getting themselves involved in, and it's really important.
If you're a tenant who's going to benefit benefit, isn't it? I think this is the other thing. But the baseline, I think DEFRA, it's worth saying, and Jannet, I hope I'm not sort of speaking out of turn, that we're working really hard in terms of this baseline, particularly with moorlands. And if it's okay, just for me to give a flavour of what we're doing on the SFI. So there's, Jannet referred to this early rollout. And it's something that we've developed very fast over the last month or so, isn't it? We're looking at how DEFRA can support upland farmers to really understand their baseline much better. And that's, we hope, in the next week or so to have a little, there'll be a little bit more to say about that. But it's something DEFRA are taking really seriously. And once you've got that baseline, then it makes it much easier to sell. But I say that, Clive, you're not Mr. Normal Farmer, and I think for a lot of the people I'm working with, this is just so out of their comfort zone. And if you're running a small farm, I would second what Stuart is saying. People need to have a framework in which to have this. We had someone, come along suddenly and say, we want you to put all this land into the climate fund bid. You have to sign up. They said, unfortunately, this was an environmental organisation, unfortunately, we need landowner consent before we can submit your land in our application. So I said, well, that's quite good that you need landowner consent. But anyway, then they said, how do we, but does the owner go for that, for climate fund, or do they go for carbon credits? How do you make the choice?
Yeah, you make a very important point as well. I've always been a big gripe with direct payments of mine is this difference between a farmer and a landowner. Land ownership is an investment, farming is a trade, and that needs to be recognised. We farm, the majority of land that we farm is under contract farming and tenancy type agreements. So, ultimately, for me, BPS and IACS before it has been of more benefit to my landowners than to me. I've just been the vehicle to collect it for them. And I very much hope that that isn't the case in Elms. And also, when it comes to things like carbon, it's the farmer, again, that is facilitating that sequestration. Yeah. That doesn't mean, say, a landowner shouldn't be rewarded as well. That investments should return dividends, shouldn't they? So that's a difficult balance. But Stuart's right, the carbon market is a bit the Wild West. I've been involved in helping develop this company that's doing it in the last 12 months, and it's all about the ISO certification and correct contracts and making sure that people aren't tying themselves up in knots, committing to things that they can't achieve or can't do. And from a buyer's point of view, it's the ISO certification that's important. They need that because they're not going to buy a handshake or a promise. They need something tangible to show the board or whatever. So it's interesting because, and I'm glad to hear what Jannet says about not letting SFI kind of stop that because, our cover crops are already being paid for or whatever, because it's important, I think, those markets can develop, because I think they could end up replacing kind of government support. It could end up being such a good market that we just don't need taxpayers' money, and we can do what we all ultimately should really aspire to do, which is stand on our own 2 feet as an industry.
Okay, Jannet, do you want to pick up some of those?
Yeah.
points?
So thanks for the question. It's a really good question and very important one. And there's 3 different elements to this. The first is that we can't even start paying the money out unless we've got really good evidence that paying for those actions can result in outcomes. And there is a lot of scrutiny within government and by others on what we're proposing to spend this money on and whether it's good value or not. And so there's a sort of what's the scientific basis for us paying for certain things, and what are the outcomes we can expect, and can we demonstrate that it's reasonable to expect them. And then the second level is, overall, having spent that money, can we, government, demonstrate that it achieved those outcomes overall? And so we have to have a fairly extensive monitoring and evaluation program in place at the government level to look at this money, this £2.4 billion a year, which is obviously a lot of money that, exactly as has been said, is competing against other priorities. Can we demonstrate what value that's created at the government level? And then the third question is at the farm level, where the baseline is not well developed. And as Julia says, we've been working really hard on this, particularly with a focus on the moorlands for now, to be able to actually pay farmers to start collecting some of that data now so that we can have the baseline at a farm level. And then we can look at that data across the country. We can start using that to inform local priorities. Some of our tests and trials have been looking at the role of data and baselining and how that can inform both what we pay for in schemes and also what the local priorities are that are set and what actions are paid for. So we're really actively working on this and very much recognise the importance of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yellow cube. Under your chin.
Thank you very much. My question is to Jannet Hughes. I'm a farmer from the North Kent marshes, and Jannet, we want to help you. It's great you're here at this great event and producing public goods, and we want to provide the solutions, but there are one or two places where you know, as well as anybody else, and as well as Richard Benyon, your new minister on the left, he certainly knows, and whether now he's a government minister, he could admit to it. I suspect that. But in some cases, especially of public goods, DEFRA policies are not just unproductive, they're actually counterproductive. Now, that is bonkers. We expect government policies not always to work, we expect them to, but for them to be counterproductive, that is madness. And that's in the case of farmland birds, where they're declining, and that's one thing that Stuart Roberts would know as anyone, what the farmers get so much flack about from environmental activists about declining farmland birds. But Jannet, you know the reasons why, because DEFRA policies in some cases are counterproductive, because the prescriptions are biologically perverse. They're politically correct, but biologically perverse. And quite clearly, we know that many different DEFRA civil servants are captured by environmental activist groups, and it's farmers who get the flack. And I just sort of feel, as I come to the end of my farming career, so it's nothing to do with me, we want to help you to get it right, and we want to make sure that the farming industry delivers. And I'm addressing this to the minister on your, sitting on the front row, Richard Benyon, who I guess is probably highly embarrassed by all this. But we want to help you to get it right. So can you look at the case of the DEFRA prescriptions being politically correct, biologically perverse, and counterproductive?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I really welcome the questions. I'm very happy to pick up with you afterwards if you've got particular concerns about the prescriptions. The way we develop the prescriptions is that we look at the science as what tells us about what achieves the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And I mentioned at the beginning the public goods that we're interested in: biodiversity, clean air, clean water, carbon, etc. But we are reviewing, as we develop our new schemes, we are looking at what is it, first of all, how do we make them less prescriptive? Because I know from talking to lots of farmers that actually the prescription is really unhelpful, both from the perspective of it not working in every case, but also then if you don't do it right, you get fined, and then it's very risky for you to go into a scheme. So from that perspective, we're reviewing how do we actually produce the guidance about what you have to do to get paid so that you've got enough flexibility and enough clarity. Tricky balance, but that's what we're working on. And then secondly, we're looking at what should we pay for and reviewing all of the science again to see what are the right actions and prioritising them according to those which achieve multiple outcomes, as I mentioned before. If anybody here's got particular concerns about specific prescriptions, I'm very happy to put you in touch with the experts in my team to talk it through in a bit more detail.
I think I just want to build slightly on what you said, because this isn't an SFI specific thing, actually. This is about policy across the board. So it's a bit unfair in some ways to aim it all at you, but Jannet, you're the only one with a DEFRA T-shirt on the stage.
I'm always happy to take questions.
And it's always good to know there's a minister over your shoulder, even though you're not looking at him at the time.
There are two here today, I believe.
I was going to say, I'm sure there's two in the room, if I'm not mistaken. But the real issue here is, for example, let's just take a real live example I'm dealing with at the moment. If I take the farming rules for water, okay, I am being positively incentivized to, or negatively, depending on how you want to look at it, to comply with the farming rules for water, okay, that are telling me how to treat digestate or manure or whatever. By following that prescription, I am then positively working against the air quality regulations, because I'm now moving, I've now got to store more muck, and I think it's the real exciting bit at the moment, actually, is with co-design, with us having control, without the bureaucracy that we've possibly lived with in the past, we are able to unpick those contradictions, but we've got to be aware of them. And unfortunately, we too often, and I will too often talk to somebody about farming rules for water, and we'll have a great discussion about farming rules for water. And then next week, I'll have a great discussion about nitrates and about air quality. But we don't have the discussion between the two. And I think that's really where we've got to all be much better at that. And as farmers, we've got to be better at that discussion. As ministers, we've got to be better at seeing that whole picture. As civil servants, we have, and all of us have, because there are absolutely countless numbers of contradictions where I'm incentivized to do one thing that works to the polar opposite of something else in another policy area.
Yeah, we really recognise that issue, and it has to do with regulation as much as it does to do with scheme design, actually. And one of the areas that we're looking at in some detail is how do we make regulation better, and we're looking at that fully throughout the whole process. So are the rules right to start with? And if the rules are right, are we communicating them effectively? And if we're communicating them effectively, is it easy to understand how you're supposed to apply them? And if it is, are we enforcing them in a proportionate and effective way? And in looking at, are the rules correct? We're doing it in a whole system view, not just one rule at a time, exactly for the reason that you've mentioned.
But we shouldn't just criticise, because actually there are good examples. So I got off a call. So literally the reason I was fairly late here, I was on a call with the Environment Agency this morning on a particularly sensitive water issue that actually has been dealt with in a really sensible way by farmers working with the Environment Agency, finding a solution and finding the time to deliver that solution. So it can be done. It's just a very different way to how we've done it in the past and ultimately how we did it when I was in the civil service.
That's what makes it so exciting to be in my job and why it's the best job in government, as I mentioned at the beginning.
Yes. And just a quick shout out too for Sustainable Food Trust, who are themselves doing some really important and interesting work to try and harmonise all of the metrics that we are trying to work with, not just across soil and water quality, but also across health and across a fairer food system. So it is a really complex and interconnected problem with lots of folk doing the work on it. So I think we've got time for one more question, yellow cube, as long as you're a speedy question asker.
Okay. I'm Andrew Ross from Global Garden, and I work on the bond market in the field of green finance. And my question to you, Jannet, is HM Treasury has given 22 billion to the UK Infrastructure Bank, and it's given it a remit to invest in natural capital, which you haven't yet mentioned. And there's the net zero commitment by the government, and we're heading for COP26. How are DEFRA's policies connected with the immense amount of money that the bond market is trying to invest in this area at the landscape scale? It can't do small stuff. It starts at about 500 million.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. That's a really good question.
I'm giving a talk on this in my lecture at the Fungi tent tomorrow at 4:30.
Yes, and well done. Good pitch. And while we're pitching in, I'm also chairing another session at 1 o'clock tomorrow on the same subject. So we're going to be talking a lot about this tomorrow. Great.
Rather than try and answer, I might just come along and listen to find out the answer tomorrow. But just to say, we are working on this. It's complicated, obviously, and that's why we've been working on it through our tests and trials to see, particularly in the landscape recovery scheme, how do we bring together public money and private money to achieve really large-scale, meaningful change. And as you'll know, it's a hugely complex question, and I look forward to hearing the answer in your lecture tomorrow.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm really, really sorry. We have run out of time, and we've asked hardly any of the questions that you were wanting to ask. But there are a few things that I think that are really worth banking. First, Janet's here, and here for the next couple of days, able to answer more of your questions in the tent. But the second is, this is a really, really complex and knotty problem. We're not just leaving CAP, we're moving to a way of going on across so many public policy areas that will tackle the climate and nature crisis and address the burgeoning public health crisis, as well as recover the economy and provide support for farmers. So this is a huge problem. And I think the thing that is most inspiring about sessions like this, conferences like this, gatherings like this, people in the room like this, is that there are so many people lining up together to create the critical mass for really positive change. This is really a moment where we have to be in it together, and events like this, conversations like this, give me some real hope and optimism that we're at least all in the conversation together. So thank you, Jannet, thank you, Clive, thank you, Julia, thank you, Thingy. We're really grateful, really. See you later.